Operation Fortitude ended before the first Allied soldier stepped onto the beaches of Normandy. Early June 1944. Nazi Germany held its armored reserves in the wrong place, waiting for an invasion that never came. Adolf Hitler believed the main blow would fall at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. He believed it strongly enough to delay decisive action when it mattered most. Why did one of the most security-obsessed regimes in modern history commit its reserves based on an invasion that did not exist? Why did German intelligence trust a phantom army commanded by George S. Patton more than the physical reality unfolding on the French coast? And why did the Allied High Command choose to stake the largest amphibious invasion in history on a deception that could not be verified until it was already too late to fix? This was not camouflage. This was not misdirection at the tactical level. This was a months-long operation designed to weaponize German expectations, German doctrine, and German command paralysis against themselves. Operation Fortitude was not about hiding Normandy. It was about convincing Germany that Normandy did not matter. And the most dangerous part is this. The Allies never truly knew whether the deception had worked until German tanks failed to arrive. What follows is not a story of clever props and fake radio traffic. It is the dissection of a strategic gamble that deliberately abandoned certainty, violated conventional military logic, and forced victory to depend on how the enemy thought, not how the enemy fought. This episode examines a single strategic question. How do you protect an operation so large that it cannot be hidden, against an enemy who is actively looking for it, without revealing where it will actually strike? By early 1944, the Allied leadership faced a contradiction that no amount of operational planning could resolve. The invasion of Western Europe required overwhelming force, massed shipping, visible troop concentrations, and months of preparation. Every prerequisite for success also created intelligence signatures impossible to conceal. Traditional doctrine offered only partial answers. Disperse forces. Maintain secrecy. Control leaks. Reduce signals. None of those solutions were sufficient. Because Germany did not need perfect intelligence. Germany only needed to be confident about where the main attack would land. Operation Fortitude emerged from this deadlock. Not as an auxiliary deception, but as a parallel campaign whose sole purpose was to shape German decision-making before the first shot was fired. This is why Fortitude qualifies as a genuinely unconventional strategy. It did not aim to mislead at the margins. It aimed to overwrite the enemy's internal logic for interpreting reality. The Allies accepted a premise most commanders would reject outright. That it was safer to manufacture a false certainty for the enemy than to rely on secrecy they could not guarantee. And if that premise collapsed, even briefly, Normandy would not fail quietly. It would fail catastrophically. To understand why such a dangerous idea was even considered, we need to look at the strategic map the Allies were trapped inside. By early 1944, the European war had entered a phase where power was no longer the main variable. The Allies possessed superior industrial output, growing air dominance, and expanding manpower. Germany, by contrast, was strategically stretched, fighting on multiple fronts, and bleeding resources. Yet none of that translated automatically into a safe path across the English Channel. The problem was geography. Western Europe offered only a limited number of invasion corridors capable of supporting a large amphibious landing. Among them, Pas de Calais stood out with brutal clarity. It was the narrowest point of the channel. It allowed faster crossings, shorter supply lines, and easier air cover from southern England. German planners knew this. They had always known this. Normandy, by comparison, was operationally inferior on paper. Longer sea routes. Worse initial port access. More complex logistics in the first critical weeks. If one were to draw invasion arrows using pure military logic, most of them pointed toward Calais. This created the first structural constraint for the Allies. They were planning to attack at a location that looked wrong to the enemy, but only if the enemy could be persuaded that a better option still existed elsewhere. The second constraint was time. Weather windows in the channel were narrow and unforgiving. Tides, moonlight, sea state, and air conditions all had to align. A delay of weeks could push the operation into a completely different strategic season. This meant Germany did not need to guess the exact day. They only needed to hold their reserves in the correct region long enough to blunt the landing. The third constraint was German defensive doctrine. After years of debate, the German High Command had split into two competing philosophies. One faction believed in forward defense, crushing the invasion at the beaches. The other favored mobile reserves, allowing a landing, then counterattacking with armored formations. Hitler resolved this debate in the worst possible way. He centralized control of the armored reserves under his personal authority. As a result, German response speed depended not only on information accuracy, but on Hitler's perception of where the main invasion truly was. This created a decision bottleneck. Even if local commanders suspected Normandy, they could not commit major reserves without confirmation that this was not a diversion. And this is where Fortitude's opportunity emerged. The fourth constraint was intelligence asymmetry. The Allies knew Germany was watching. They knew reconnaissance flights were tracking ports, roads, and camps. They knew radio traffic was being intercepted. They knew human sources existed inside Britain. Total concealment was impossible. But there was a deeper asymmetry at play. Germany believed it understood Allied strategic preferences. It believed Allied commanders would choose the shortest route, the fastest buildup, the most efficient logistics. That belief acted as a filter. Information consistent with it was amplified. Information that contradicted it was discounted. This was not a flaw unique to Germany. It was a universal property of large command systems under pressure. And it meant the battlefield extended far beyond Normandy's beaches. It extended into how German intelligence officers categorized reports, how staff officers framed briefings, how Hitler interpreted fragments of incomplete data. The final constraint was political. The Normandy invasion was not just a military operation. It was a test of Allied unity, credibility, and resolve. Failure would not simply cost lives. It would fracture trust between governments and commanders who had spent years building toward this moment. There was no second attempt of equal scale waiting in reserve. Under these constraints, the Allies faced a narrow set of options. They could hope secrecy held, despite all evidence to the contrary. Or they could attempt something far riskier. They could decide not to fight German defenses directly at first. They could fight German expectations instead. And inside that decision, an idea began to take shape that most military textbooks would later struggle to justify. Military doctrine offered clear guidance for amphibious invasion. Concentrate force. Preserve secrecy. Minimize deception to avoid internal confusion. Strike fast, overwhelm defenses, exploit momentum. This logic had worked before. It had worked in North Africa. It had worked in Sicily. It had even worked, imperfectly, at Salerno. By this logic, the safest course before Normandy was simple. Reduce visible troop movements. Limit radio transmissions. Control information tightly. Prepare quietly, then strike decisively. But by 1944, this doctrine collided with reality. The invasion force required thousands of ships, millions of tons of supplies, and hundreds of thousands of men. Ports could not hide this buildup. Roads could not absorb it silently. Airfields could not disguise the surge in activity. Secrecy at this scale was not just difficult. It was structurally impossible. Textbook doctrine assumed a binary condition: either the enemy knows, or the enemy does not. Fortitude emerged from rejecting that assumption entirely. The Allies understood something uncomfortable. Germany would know an invasion was coming. The only meaningful uncertainty left was where and whether this was the main effort. Traditional thinking treated deception as a supplement. A feint here. A diversion there. Something to support the real blow. Fortitude inverted that hierarchy. The deception was not supporting the invasion. The invasion depended on the deception. This inversion violated a core military instinct. Commanders are trained to reduce variables, not multiply them. They are trained to rely on material superiority, not on the psychology of the enemy's decision process. Choosing Fortitude meant deliberately increasing uncertainty inside the Allied system in order to decrease it inside the German system. That trade-off made most conventional solutions unacceptable. If the Allies followed textbook logic, Germany would see the same indicators and draw the same conclusion. Normandy would be identified early as the main landing zone. Armored reserves would move faster. Local commanders would gain confidence to act without waiting for Hitler. The invasion would still occur, but it would meet a fundamentally different defensive posture. This exposed a deeper flaw in conventional doctrine. Military textbooks focus on how forces behave. They rarely address how bureaucracies under stress behave. Germany's command structure was rigid, centralized, and psychologically constrained by expectations formed over years of planning. Its intelligence system did not simply collect data. It filtered data through pre-existing models of Allied behavior. The Allies chose to attack those models directly. Instead of hiding preparation, they exaggerated preparation in the wrong place. Instead of suppressing signals, they flooded German intelligence with signals that confirmed its assumptions. Instead of minimizing deception, they made deception the central organizing principle. This choice carried a brutal implication. If Fortitude failed, there would be no fallback. The invasion force could not simply relocate. The landing beaches could not be changed at the last minute. The weather window would close. A single incorrect assumption inside the deception architecture could expose the entire operation. And yet, the alternative was worse. If the Allies obeyed doctrine, they would face a prepared enemy reacting quickly and coherently. If they broke doctrine, they might paralyze that reaction entirely. This is the moment where Fortitude crossed the line from clever idea into strategic gamble. Because now the question was no longer whether the plan was orthodox. The question was whether anyone inside the Allied command structure was willing to authorize a strategy that relied on manipulating belief rather than controlling events. That decision did not emerge cleanly. It formed through tension, skepticism, and a series of dangerous assumptions that could not be tested in advance. The decision behind Operation Fortitude did not appear as a single bold proposal placed neatly on a table. It emerged gradually, through friction. By late 1943, Allied leadership understood that deception would be necessary. What they did not agree on was scale. Most senior commanders supported limited feints, localized misdirection tied closely to tactical objectives. Few were comfortable with building an entire operational fiction that would persist for months and absorb real resources. The resistance was not philosophical. It was structural. Fortitude required multiple organizations to act against their own instincts. Intelligence services had to fabricate consistency instead of pursuing truth. Operational planners had to tolerate ambiguity rather than eliminate it. Political leadership had to approve a plan whose success could not be verified before execution. This created immediate internal tension. If deception failed, responsibility would be diffuse but blame would be concentrated. No commander wanted to explain why thousands of vehicles, ships, and men had been assigned to something that never existed, while the real invasion struggled. The debate crystallized around a small number of assumptions. The first assumption was psychological. German command behavior, especially at the highest level, was slow to adapt under uncertainty. Decision authority was centralized. Contradictory reports tended to paralyze rather than accelerate action. If this assumption was wrong, if Germany delegated authority or reacted flexibly, Fortitude would collapse. The second assumption was doctrinal. German planners believed the main invasion would come at Pas de Calais. This belief had been reinforced by years of analysis, geography, and wargaming. Fortitude did not attempt to create this belief. It attempted to exploit it. If German doctrine had been more fluid, the deception would have faced a far steeper challenge. The third assumption was systemic. German intelligence relied on patterns more than anomalies. It looked for consistency across signals, not isolated proof. This meant the Allies did not need to eliminate all contradictory evidence. They only needed to drown it inside a coherent narrative. These assumptions were not certainties. They were educated risks. Inside Allied planning circles, this was deeply uncomfortable. There were arguments that Normandy already carried enough risk. There were warnings that deception at this scale could generate internal confusion, friendly units misreading friendly signals, logistics disrupted by artificial constraints, command chains polluted by false information. And there was a quieter concern rarely voiced openly. Once deception became central, it could no longer be treated as optional. If Fortitude began and then faltered, stopping it would itself become a signal to the enemy. This locked the Allies into escalation. A small deception could be abandoned. A large deception had to be maintained all the way to contact. The turning point came when planners reframed the problem. They stopped asking whether fortitude was dangerous. They asked whether not doing it was worse. Without fortitude, Germany would concentrate forces closer to Normandy by default. With fortitude, there was at least a chance those forces would remain displaced long enough to matter. That calculation shifted the debate. The question became not whether fortitude could guarantee success. It clearly could not. The question became whether fortitude could delay German certainty long enough to create irreversible momentum on the ground. Once framed this way, the logic hardened. If the Allies needed time, they needed German doubt. If they needed German doubt, they needed German belief in an alternative reality. And that reality required a visible, convincing focal point. Which led to the most controversial element of the entire operation. A phantom army. A real commander. And a deception so elaborate that it would begin shaping German expectations months before the first landing craft moved. But designing the idea was the easy part. Turning it into a functioning system was where fortitude came closest to failure. Execution transformed fortitude from an abstract risk into a living system. This was the most dangerous phase. Because once the deception entered motion, it could no longer be paused, corrected quietly, or partially withdrawn. Every action now generated signals, some intended, some accidental, and Germany was watching all of them. The core challenge was coherence. A fake army could not behave like a stage prop. It had to behave like an organization. That meant routines, hierarchy, administrative friction, predictable inefficiencies. The first U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, was built to exist indirectly. Not as a visible formation, but as a network of traces that German intelligence would recognize as authentic. Radio traffic came first. Operators did not transmit dramatic false orders. They transmitted boredom. Daily logistics chatter. Training schedules. Unit coordination messages that meant nothing tactically, but everything structurally. German intelligence was not listening for secrets. It was listening for patterns. The traffic followed realistic rhythms. Shift changes. Peaks and lulls. Human inconsistency. This required discipline bordering on obsession. One mistake, a message sent too quickly, a call sign reused incorrectly, could unravel months of work. Physical deception followed. Dummy landing craft, vehicles, and camps were placed where German reconnaissance expected to find them. Not clustered. Not exaggerated. Distributed with the casual inefficiency of a real buildup. But here lay a critical constraint. The deception could not consume real logistics capacity. Ports still had to move genuine supplies for Normandy. Roads still had to function. Every fake convoy risked interfering with a real one. This created constant tension between illusion and necessity. The deception apparatus had to be large enough to be convincing, but light enough to avoid becoming a liability. Human intelligence was the most fragile component. Double agents were fed information in fragments. Never complete plans. Never dramatic revelations. Just enough detail to reinforce what German handlers already believed. This required restraint. Over-delivering information would raise suspicion. Under-delivering would weaken credibility. At times, deception planners deliberately allowed minor truths to pass through, information that caused limited Allied losses elsewhere, to protect the integrity of the larger narrative. This was the hidden moral cost. Lives were weighed against plausibility. And throughout all of this, timing became the silent enemy. As the real invasion approached, the risk curve steepened. German reconnaissance intensified. Signals intelligence scrutiny sharpened. Pressure mounted to confirm what Germany already believed. At least twice, the deception came dangerously close to collapse. Inconsistencies appeared. Small discrepancies in unit identities. Questions from German handlers that cut closer to reality than expected. Each time, the response was escalation, not correction. More traffic. More administrative noise. More confirmation of the Calais narrative. Stopping would have been more suspicious than continuing. By early June, fortitude had reached a point of no return. The Phantom Army was not just visible. It was established in the German mind. But this created a final, brutal risk. The deception could not prevent Germany from seeing Normandy. It could only persuade Germany that Normandy was not decisive. If German command concluded, even briefly, that Normandy was the main effort, the entire architecture would become irrelevant. Everything now depended on how Germany interpreted the first hours of contact. And that interpretation would be shaped not by what Germany saw, but by what it expected to see next. When Allied forces landed in Normandy, German intelligence did not fail to notice it. What failed was interpretation. From the first reports, German commanders understood that a major landing was underway. What they did not accept was that this was the main effort. That distinction mattered more than the landing itself. Normandy was immediately framed inside an existing mental model. A dangerous diversion. A necessary probe. A prelude to the real blow at Pas de Calais. This framing did not emerge from ignorance. It emerged from consistency. For months, German intelligence had been absorbing signals pointing toward Calais. Radio traffic. Agent reports. Logistical indicators. The presence of a credible American commander associated with aggressive operations. Normandy arrived as a contradiction, but not a decisive one. German decision-making now entered its most vulnerable phase. At the operational level, local commanders requested flexibility. They saw the scale of the landing. They felt the pressure on the ground. But authority over mobile reserves did not reside with them. At the strategic level, decision-makers faced a dilemma they could not resolve quickly. If Normandy was the main invasion, committing reserves immediately was essential. If Normandy was a diversion, committing reserves would expose Calais and end the war in the West. Fortitude had engineered this dilemma deliberately. Every hour of delay increased Allied survivability on the beaches. Every hour of hesitation allowed engineers to secure exits, unload supplies, and stabilize fragile footholds. The deception did not stop at first contact. German intelligence continued to receive signals suggesting that Fusag remained intact. That it was waiting. That its movement had not yet begun. Normandy, in this narrative, was absorbing attention exactly as intended. Here is the critical failure point. German command treated intelligence as a confirmation mechanism, not a decision catalyst. They waited for proof that contradicted Fortitude's story strongly enough to justify overturning months of belief. That proof never arrived in a single, undeniable form. Instead, it arrived as fragments. Conflicting reports. Partial confirmations. Ambiguous indicators. In such an environment, centralized command structures default to caution. Hitler, in particular, exhibited a consistent behavioral pattern. He delayed irreversible commitments under uncertainty. He preferred to wait for clarity rather than act on probability. Fortitude exploited this tendency mercilessly. By the time German leadership began to reassess the Calais assumption seriously, the cost of reversal had grown. Normandy was no longer a gamble. It was a reality. But even then, the delay persisted. Some armored formations remained in place, guarding against an invasion that still felt inevitable. The logic of the deception had outlived the deception itself. This was not stupidity. It was organizational inertia under psychological pressure. Germany did not fail because it lacked information. It failed because it could not abandon a coherent explanation fast enough to replace it with another. Fortitude had not blinded German command. It had anchored it. And anchoring, under conditions of time pressure, can be more lethal than ignorance. Yet this outcome was not guaranteed. Had German command structures been more decentralized, the delay might have shortened. Had local initiative overridden strategic caution, reserves might have moved sooner. Had one credible signal broken through clearly enough, Fortitude's architecture could have collapsed in hours. The deception worked not because Germany believed everything. It worked because Germany believed enough, for just long enough. And that narrow margin defines the real nature of the gamble. Because a strategy that succeeds only by delaying certainty always carries a cost, and that cost does not end when the deception succeeds. The immediate outcome of Operation Fortitude was not victory. It was time. Time for infantry to survive the most vulnerable hours of an amphibious landing. Time for engineers to clear exits under fire. Time for logistics to turn a beachhead into a functioning front. German armored reserves did not arrive when they still could have changed the equation decisively. Some arrived too late. Some never arrived at all. From a purely operational standpoint, this delay mattered more than any single tactical success on D-Day itself. But reducing Fortitude to its outcome misses the deeper cost. Because Fortitude did not win Normandy for free. It redistributed risk, away from the beaches and into places history rarely audits. The first cost was human. Double agents were pushed closer to exposure than standard tradecraft would ever recommend. Their credibility had to be preserved at all costs, including the delivery of information that caused real Allied losses in secondary theaters. This was not collateral damage. It was a calculated sacrifice embedded into the deception architecture. The second cost was organizational. Entire command systems were forced to operate in a state of controlled dishonesty. Units followed routines designed to be observed rather than executed. Communications existed to be intercepted. This introduced internal friction that no after-action report could fully capture. Mistakes had to be tolerated longer than normal. Inconsistencies could not be corrected too aggressively. The illusion took priority over efficiency. The third cost was strategic exposure. By committing so fully to the Calais narrative, the Allies created their own vulnerability. If German command had shifted decisively, even late, the consequences would have been severe. Normandy's early success depended on fragile margins. Beach congestion. Limited armor. Incomplete airstrips. Fortitude did not remove these weaknesses. It merely bought time before they could be exploited. There was also a political cost. Success reinforced a dangerous lesson. That deception at the strategic level could substitute for overwhelming force. That manipulating enemy perception could reliably compensate for material risk. This belief would echo into future conflicts, sometimes without the structural conditions that made Fortitude viable. Finally, there was a psychological cost borne by the decision-makers themselves. Fortitude forced senior commanders to live with uncertainty longer than doctrine would normally allow. They had to proceed without confirmation. They had to resist the instinct to check the plan through direct action. Victory required waiting, while lives were already being spent. If Fortitude had failed, it would not have failed quietly. It would have failed catastrophically, with no clean explanation and no single point of blame. The strategy did not eliminate risk. It concentrated it. And concentration, by definition, increases the consequences of error. Which leads to the final question this operation forces us to confront: what was Fortitude really about, beneath the props and the phantom armies? Operation Fortitude is often remembered as an act of deception. That description is incomplete. At its core, Fortitude was a strategy about controlling how decisions are made under uncertainty. The Allies did not defeat German intelligence. They did not silence German reconnaissance. They did not prevent Germany from seeing Normandy. They shaped the framework through which Germany interpreted what it saw. This distinction matters. Most military strategies attempt to control events. Fortitude attempted to control interpretation. The operation was built on a cold assessment. Large organizations do not react to facts in isolation. They react to facts filtered through doctrine, expectation, hierarchy, and fear of irreversible error. Fortitude weaponized that reality. The first rule it broke was the idea that secrecy is the highest form of protection. At scale, secrecy collapses. Fortitude replaced secrecy with managed visibility. The second rule it broke was the belief that deception should be minimal and tactical. Fortitude demonstrated that deception can operate as a parallel strategic system, one that competes with kinetic operations for priority and resources. The third rule it broke was the assumption that success depends on certainty. Fortitude accepted uncertainty as a permanent condition. It did not seek confirmation. It sought delay. This leads to the first strategic principle. Principle 1: in complex wars, delay can be more decisive than surprise. Normandy did not require Germany to be blind. It required Germany to hesitate. Fortitude achieved this by anchoring German command to a belief that felt safer than reacting to new information. The second principle is more uncomfortable. Principle 2: bureaucracies defend coherence more fiercely than accuracy under pressure. German command structures did not lack data. They lacked the institutional flexibility to abandon a coherent explanation once it had taken root. Fortitude did not overwhelm Germany with falsehoods. It gave Germany a complete story, one that made internal sense and reduced anxiety. Abandoning that story would have meant accepting that months of preparation, analysis, and expectation had been wrong. Under time pressure, large systems resist that admission. The third principle is the most dangerous. Principle 3, strategic deception works only when it aligns with the enemy's existing beliefs. Fortitude did not invent Pas de Calais as a target. Germany already believed in it. The operation succeeded because it amplified what Germany expected to see, not because it forced Germany to accept something alien. This is why fortitude is not easily repeatable. It required a rare alignment of conditions. Predictable enemy doctrine. Centralized decision authority. Controllable intelligence channels. Overwhelming Allied coordination. And the willingness to absorb moral, political, and operational costs without immediate feedback. Remove any one of these, and the strategy collapses. Fortitude was not genius in isolation. It was genius inside a very narrow window. And that window closes quickly in most wars. The final lesson is not flattering. Fortitude reminds us that some victories are won not by superior action, but by superior patience. Not by eliminating risk, but by choosing where risk is allowed to exist. The Allies did not know fortitude had worked until Germany failed to act. That moment, when nothing happened, was the real confirmation. And it underscores the truth at the heart of this operation. The most dangerous strategies are not those that fail loudly. They are the ones that succeed quietly, by convincing the enemy to wait. Operation Fortitude did not defeat Germany on the beaches of Normandy. It defeated Germany in the hours before a decision could no longer be delayed. It did not rely on brilliance alone. It relied on restraint, discipline, and a willingness to let uncertainty stand. Most strategies promise control. Fortitude offered none. It offered only a narrow window in which the enemy might hesitate long enough for reality to outrun belief. That window opened once. Briefly. At extraordinary cost. And history remembers the landing that followed. But the more unsettling truth is this. By the time the first ramp dropped on D-Day, the decisive battle had already been fought. Inside the enemy's mind. And that is a battlefield most doctrines still struggle to map.